Hi there! Welcome to Lipstick and Luminol. I will be telling a true crime story while doing my makeup. This is my very first one, so please bear with me if it's a little bumpy. Anyways, let's get to it. Taking off the glasses, let's go. Voila! So, the first case that I'm going to be doing is Israel Keyes. The thing that I find interesting about Israel Keyes is that either people know nothing about him or this case sticks out in their mind like a sore thumb, and it's something that's like, it's a brutal case, I'm not gonna lie. So to begin, I will give a trigger warning. There will be discussion of sexual assault and rape, as well as some animal cruelty. There will be no details. However, those things will be mentioned, and I thought it would be important to let you know beforehand. So let's get into it. I'm looking down here because my mirror is down here. Just wanted to let you know. So Israel Keyes was born January 7th, 1978 in Richmond, Utah. He was the second born out of a total of 7 siblings. He was born to John and Heidi Keyes. He had an older sister, 4 younger sisters, and 3 younger brothers. So after he was born, his family moved to a place called Colville in Washington. There he was raised as a Mormon. He was homeschooled, and the family became radicalized when he was about 3 to 5 years old by a religious group called the Ark. And the Ark was known for being extremely racist and very, very anti-Semitic. So he kind of turned against that as he got older. But when the family moved to Colville, he became really good friends with his next door neighbors. His next door neighbor was a man who, well, at the time he wasn't a man, he was a child, but he was friends with a fella named Chevy Kehoe, and Chevy would later on become a family annihilator, along with the fact that he was already a white supremacist through and through. So during his childhood years, Keyes actually would walk around with a pistol, just like as if it was a casual accessory. And by the age of 14, his grandfather decided, I know what to get this kid for his birthday. And he got him a .38 caliber revolver. You know, something that every 14-year-old boy just needs. So he outfitted this revolver with a homemade silencer, which, like, I actually find really intriguing, because how in the world do you just like figure out how to make a silencer? But after that, he and his friend Chevy and Chevy's brother would break into homes and commit some burglaries. And around this time, Keyes actually began, this is what I was warning about, he actually began to kill like family pets, which is one of the telltale signs that someone is going to be a murderer, if not a serial killer. So he started killing pets, and the number is unknown. However, we do know, at least by various accounts, that it was more than one. So in the 90s, Israel came to his family and basically told them that he was an atheist. He didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in what they believed in, which, like, if your family's like religious, it's one thing, but to be like full-blown white supremacist, yeah, I can see why he would have turned away from that. Sometime between 1996 and 1998, I'm going to let you know right now, that's when I discuss sexual assault. So if you want to skip ahead, now's the chance to do so. He actually commits his first like violent crime towards a human, and he is on a hiking trail where he ends up abducting a young girl who was in between the ages of 14 and 16, and he rapes her, and he had full intentions of killing her, but for some reason he just changed his mind, which is kind of a consistent narrative with him. He like chooses to do something and then halfway through switches it up. He didn't kill her and he let her go. Later in 98, he went to New Jersey and he enlisted in the army. And time jump to 2001, he received a DUI charge in Thurston County in Washington, followed by a state charge for driving with a suspended license. And then later that year, he was honorably discharged from the army. So Keyes like took advantage of the fact that he was discharged from the army and was like, well, got nothing else to do. Might as well start a murder spree. And he murdered a couple who are unidentified. They have yet to be identified, or at least their identity has yet to be made public. And then he was like, cool, did that, and moved to a place called either Nia Bay in Washington, where he met a girl and they started dating. We don't know her identity, and probably for good reason, because they ended up having a child. November 13th of 2002, his father passes away, and he is also left by his girlfriend, and she takes custody of their daughter and she leaves him. So he kind of has a lot going on at this point. We don't really know a whole lot about him in between 2002 until 2006, when he claims 2 more victims. Again, these people are unidentified, or at least their identity has not been made known to the public. So at this point, he's at 4 murders and 1 rape. It's at this point that he starts just traveling across America, just traveling through the states. No one really knows kind of what he's doing or why he's going. He's just doing his thing. He's just traveling. 2007 is where he moves to Anchorage, Alaska, and that becomes very important later. So he opens a business called Keyes Construction, and as far as everyone knew, he was just a regular guy who owned a construction business, and he was reliable and just a regular guy who lived in Alaska. Another quick time jump is to 2009. So after he has traveled to California, Washington, and New England, Keyes decides, you know what, I'm out of money, so I should rob a bank. Natural progression of things, you know? So April 10th, he allegedly abducted and murdered a man while he was like prepping for his bank robbery. So now we're up to 5 murders. We don't know the identity of this man, and he's like, cool, I murdered someone, time to walk into the community bank in Tupper Lake. And he was wearing sunglasses, a jacket, jeans, a fake goatee and mustache. He was also wearing gloves and gray sneakers, and he was armed with a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson semi-automatic pistol, and he also had a .22 caliber 10-22 Ruger Charger pistol. I know nothing about guns, so that meant absolutely nothing to me. If you know about guns, I'm glad you understood that. So he successfully robs this bank, and he flees, and he takes the guns, he puts them in a toolbox, and then buries the toolbox. He buries it about half a mile down a path in the Woodside natural area in Essex, Vermont. and that's important for later as well. So inside the toolbox was obviously the Smith & Wesson and the Ruger charger. I think it's Ruger. Please don't come for me. 4 days later, he returns on an airplane, and he then spent the next 2 years traveling again through the States. Between April and May of 2011, another time jump here, he constructed another homemade, I forgot to put on setting powder, 1 second. He constructed a homemade silencer again, this one for the charger pistol, and was like, time to put this to use. So he takes a flight to Indiana and then drives to New York. And then once he gets to New York, he drives all the way to Vermont, where he recovers the toolbox that he had buried earlier. And his intention was to just randomly target a motorist, but that became too challenging for him. So he ended up walking half a mile from where his hotel was and ended up on Colbert Street, and the house that he chose was 8 Colbert Street. At 8 Colbert Street lived Bill and Lorraine Currier. So Bill and Lorraine were very well liked in their community. Everyone knew them, their neighbors, like they were known. They had a good social circle. So he sees this house, and the reason that he chose this couple was because the house that they had an attached garage, seemingly no children, seemingly no dog, which were all accurate, and from the outside he could deduce where the master bedroom was, which I think is absolutely terrifying. He had this all planned out beforehand because back in Essex, he had seen a farmhouse that was abandoned. And he was like, you know what? I could put this to some good use. So that night he goes and he breaks in to their home. He's wearing a headlamp so he can do what he calls is a blitz attack, where he watches them sleep for a bit and then wakes them up, subdues them, ties them up, puts them in their own vehicle and drives them to this farmhouse. When they reach the farmhouse, he goes to take Bill to the basement, and Lorraine sees an opportunity to run. So she tries to run, but unfortunately Keys catches her and tackles her to the ground, subdues her, and because he's pissed at both himself and her because she almost got away, he shoots Bill in an absolute fit of rage, and he brings Bill's body down to the basement. After he brings Bill down to the basement, he comes back to get Lorraine. And again, skip ahead, and he sexually assaults her and then strangles her until she's unconscious. And then he brings her down to the basement, where when she wakes up, he strangles her to death. After he has successfully killed Bill with his brand new silencer and assaults and kills Lorraine, he just like buries their bodies at the farmhouse and then leaves. He was intending on using their car in a bank robbery, but he changed his mind because Apparently the car had some mechanical issues. He leaves, and while he is leaving, he stops at the White National Monument Forest in New Hampshire, where he disposes of everything that he took from the couriers, including Lorian's revolver that he had stolen when he originally picked them up. Something that worked out in his favor is that October comes around and this farmhouse was set to be demolished. So they demolish it and they excavate it, and their bodies, as far as we know, are brought to a landfill and they're never found. Later that year, he purchases a police scanner to keep an eye out just to see if anyone is kind of on his tail. Almost a year later, February of 2012, he has the urge to kill again. This time he gets a little overconfident and stays in Anchorage. He's like scouting Anchorage for a potential victim. He's just kind of driving around and he comes across a coffee kiosk, which is like basically a food truck but for coffee. And inside working is 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. And Samantha is a beautiful and bright young woman who didn't deserve what she got. It's super upsetting, the things that he does to her. So I'm not going to be too graphic, but I will say that there is some stuff with her corpse, nothing sexual, but I'll warn you when you get there that it's a little bit difficult to listen to. So he sees Samantha working alone at night, and Samantha's boyfriend was supposed to be picking her up. Keys walks over to the kiosk, and there's actually CCTV footage of this. You watch him walk up, you watch her put her hands up as he draws a gun. He demands the money from the till, and then he gets her to turn off the lights and he ties her up, and he actually plans on waiting until her boyfriend gets there because he was supposed to pick her up that night. He ends up changing his mind again for some reason and decides, nope, I'm just gonna take Samantha. You can watch on the tape as Samantha, he's like leading her out and she tries to run and she gets away for a second, but he catches her and tackles her, drags her to his truck. So after that, he takes her back to his house. The next day is something so brazen for a criminal to do. So at this point, he already has her abducted. I'm assuming he like threatens her, and he shows up at her home where he breaks into her boyfriend's truck, and her father actually sees this happening. So he breaks in and steals a debit that her and her boyfriend shared. Her father witnesses this and he doesn't get caught. Like he escapes too quickly, which I can't even imagine what her father would feel. So he returns after this and he, skip ahead, he sexually assaults her and then he strangles her to death. And then he takes her body and he puts it in a shed, and this is in Alaska. So he puts it in a shed and then leaves for 2 weeks where it's there to just freeze. He leaves for 2 weeks on a cruise with his family, And when he returns, he started to get worried about all the publicity that Samantha's disappearance was getting. Like you would, he decided to commit a crime spree to kind of like get the attention off of her. So this is when he goes to Dallas and commits a burglary and an arson, which no one is hurt in, thankfully. And then he drives to a place called Azel, where he gets all like dolled up for another bank robbery, because apparently he's just like really good at them. And he's wearing a hard hat and sunglasses, gloves, a breathing mask, and he robs the National Bank of Texas. And he does all of this in 2 minutes and then just dips. He just escapes. He buries the money near a cemetery, and then he tries to abduct a woman who's out walking her dog. But like Israel Keyes does, he changes his mind. So Keyes returns to Anchorage and was like, well, that was fun, but I buried my money, so now I need more money. And he sends a ransom text to Dwayne, her boyfriend. Now, the way that he gets away with this is that he keeps taking out the battery of the phone that he's sending it, so it can't be tracked. And this is the part that I was warning about her corpse. So once again, skip forward. Or basically, because her body is so well preserved, perfect, because it's so cold, he takes her body and he poses it and sews her eyes open to make it look like she's alive, and puts a recent newspaper in her hand and sends that photo to make it look like she's still alive and he just wants the ransom money. So he texts Dwayne the directions of where to go and how he is to get the money. I'm not 100% clear on whether or not it was in cash, and there's a reason I question that later, so hang tight. So he requests $30,000, which somehow the Koenigs get together. He gets the money and then dismembers her corpse and disposes of it in Matanuska Lake. He starts to, this is why I'm a little confused, because I think the way that they did it was they had to transfer the 30 grand into Samantha's account because he had access to her debit. But it's not really made 100% clear whether or not he didn't get any cash, because I know that they did have like a certain place to go. It's a little confusing. But anyways, the reason I'm bringing this up is because on February 29th, he begins withdrawing money. He begins withdrawing the ransom money. And then March 6th, he withdraws money from Samantha's account. See how it gets a little confusing? Also, I can't do liner while I'm talking, so I'm just gonna off camera. Whoop. Ka-chow. And done. So, like I was talking about, money is being withdrawn. So he's getting the ransom money, he's pulling money from Samantha's account. So when he does this, when he pulls money from her account, this alerts the Alaskan authorities and the FBI, who have been following this case, because they're like, she's gone missing. Obviously, we need to kind of like pay attention to everything that's going on. So he actually withdrew this money in Texas. So of course the FBI calls up the Texas law enforcement there. Keyes was driving a 2012 Ford Focus, and they know this because in the video where he is withdrawing the money, because he did it at an ATM, he's driving a 2012 Ford Focus, which was both the car he owned and the rental that he got in Texas. March 13th rolls around and he is driving down the highway when a Texas patrol officer notices, hey, weren't we looking for a 2012 Ford Focus? And Keys is speeding. So he's like, boom, totally able to stop this guy. Well, he stops Keys, and when he does, obviously, license and registration please, and Keys complies, and sure enough, it's an Alaskan driver's license, just like what they've been looking for. And he searches Keys's car, where he finds Samantha's debit, the phone with the battery taken out of it. He finds a gun and cash, as well as a map with highlights on it through California, Arizona, and New Mexico. Keys is arrested right then and there. However, they charge him with access device fraud, and indicted in Beaumont, Texas in a federal facility. On March 26th, Keys is brought back to Anchorage, and he basically just confesses to everything. He confesses to Samantha, and he confesses about the couriers. That April, so like not even a month later, just a few weeks, Samantha's body is actually found. Now, something that's really scary about Israel Keys is when you watch his confession and his interviews, he is very calm, very collected, has really just, it's like he's having a conversation with a friend. Just so casual about murder. He pled guilty to all the charges on one condition, that he would get the death penalty, which normally it's the opposite. It's like, I'll tell you everything as long as you don't kill me. But he was like, I'll tell you everything as long as you make sure that I die. And then after that, he made a deal with investigators that he would tell them where all the bodies were located of all the murders that he's committed, as long as the press doesn't find out. As long as they keep his name out of the media, he'll tell you everything. So in June, during a court hearing, Keys decides he's going to try and escape and tries to attack the spectators. It's assumed that it was kind of like a suicide mission. He was hoping that he would get shot, but instead he was just tased. He claimed that it wasn't on purpose and that it was just a reaction to stress, but no one believed that. From then on, every time he was brought anywhere, he had 2 armed guards. He was not allowed to have access to razors or pencils, and he also required a daily strip search. Now it's July 20th, and of course the media gets a hold of what's going on, and WCAX, which I have no idea what it stands for, I forgot to look it up before, they release his connection to the death of Bill and Lorraine. And Keys is pissed. So he refuses to speak to the authorities for the next 2 months. After that, he kind of like lightens up a little bit and tells them a bit more, but not a whole lot. And then in December, Keys writes a suicide note. Now, what I'm going to talk about next is a little graphic, so once again, scooch on ahead if you don't want to hear the gory details. But basically, the suicide note was kind of a brag about the things that he had done, and he was excited to die and things like that. He references Samantha, and it's really unsettling. And the way that he ends up committing suicide is he slits his own wrists with a razor that was somehow accidentally given to him. They're assigned to these things in jail and in prison, and he somehow slipped through the cracks that he was allowed to have a razor, so he kept it. He slits his wrists and hangs himself. The medical examiner couldn't tell which one was the cause of death, so it's likely that they both kind of went hand in hand. August 12th of 2013, it is made public that Keyes is tied to what is believed to be 11 deaths, a total of 11 deaths. All of them were killed between 2001 and 2012. And there is a possibility that he committed crimes in Canada. Canada is where he would go and he would seek out sex workers, as well as he may have committed some crimes in some other countries. It was also confirmed that he burglarized 20 to 30 houses and committed numerous bank robberies. All of his victims were randomly targeted. The only thing he really planned was fact that he was going to kill them, which brings me to one of the most disturbing parts of Israel Keyes. Not that any of it wasn't disturbing before, but all those times that he was driving across the states, just traveling, he was actually hiding kill kits. So he would bury these kill kits that contained guns and zip ties and things like that. So that way all he had to do was to get the victim to that location. Never let them take you to a secondary location. He never killed in the same place twice, which is what helped him kind of go under the radar for 11 years. So according to the FBI, Keyes strangled all of his victims except for Bill, which is likely because he wanted to test out his new silencer. So just to go over his victims one more time, because I always think it's important to pay attention to them, even though this story was mostly revolving around Israel. I do think it's important to acknowledge them because their names are what's important here. The same way that every documentary and every film that talks about serial killers, it's so important to say their names. So I want to repeat: Bill and Lorraine Currier, Samantha Koenig, and unfortunately that's kind of where it leaves off. We know of one other woman named Deborah Feldman. We know of his young rape victim when she was on that trail. We know of the 5 others that he killed that are unidentified. There's one that he killed after Samantha and one more unidentified girl, which makes a total of 11. 20 to 30 robberies, an unknown amount of bank robberies, and an unknown amount of pets that lost their lives to this man. I think it's important that we talk about crimes like this because it happens so often, and it's important for us to know these things in order to almost stay vigilant from the monsters that are out there. And he was a monster. The things that he did, he deserved so much longer in jail. He's similar to Ted Bundy in the way that he clearly enjoyed possessing his victims, and he enjoyed playing this godlike character where he really thought he was untouchable and that he was committing the most perfect crimes where he would never get away with it. And he did for 11 years. But he was caught. And eventually they'll all be caught. At least I hope so. Thanks so much for tuning in to the very first episode of Lipstick and Luminol. If you have any questions or Any feedback, please feel free to let me know. Comment down below any other cases that you might want to see, and I'm just so excited to be starting this journey. Thanks again for watching this. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much. I know it was a long video, but I hope that it kind of piqued your interest, and if at least you didn't like the story, you kind of found it a little interesting to watch me do my makeup, or vice versa. I'm glad that I could be of some sort of entertainment, and I will see you next week. Bye!